Hello, this is Mrs. Abdil, and today we are going to be reading The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. And just like with our other stories, I always like to read the background of the story because it will certainly help you to understand what's happening. It says, in this story, O. Henry makes an allusion or a reference to the Magi. According to Christian tradition, the Magi were three wise men or kings who traveled to Bethlehem, guided by a miraculous star, to present gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the infant Jesus. These gifts were prized possessions, having monetary, medicinal, and ceremonial value. So in this story, O. Henry, the author, makes an allusion, which is a reference to something famous or well known. And in this story, there's actually three, two in the story, and then the title itself. So the title is The Gift of the Magi, and the Magi were the three wise men who brought gifts to the baby Jesus. That is an allusion or a reference to the Bible. The Bible is something that is well known. Even if you don't believe in the Bible, you have at least heard of the Bible. So the Magi, or the three kings, brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the baby Jesus. So you can kind of thank them for the first Christmas gifts, or all your Christmas gifts, actually. Um, but it's a reference to something well known. So I know when my son was growing up, they would say, oh, he's got Justin Bieber hair. So you can picture, Justin Bieber's hairstyle. Or, it might be like he shook his hips like Elvis, okay, Elvis Presley. Or if I'm going to give you a test and I might say, may the odds be ever in your favor, all right, referencing the Hunger Games. So those are all things that like most people have heard of and they're well known. And the gifts that the Magi brought the baby Jesus were prized possessions. They were very important things at that during that time. So we're going to talk about prized possessions today. Prized possessions are things that are very important to you. Maybe they're things that you can't replace, they're one of a kind. Maybe it's something that's just important to you because of the person that gave it to you. Maybe it was a friend, a parent, a grandparent. And it just holds a very important place in your heart. So for this story, it says $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved one or two at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. So we're introduced to our main character here by the name of Della. And as you can see, it's the day before Christmas, and she only has $1.87. So this story was written in the early 1900s. So this was before women could have jobs. So she has saved this money for months and months. And it's just money that's left over after paying all the bills. So any pennies that she could save from buying meat from the butcher or vegetables from the vegetable man, you know um, she's been saving up. And you're going to see here that she wants to buy her husband Jim a nice present for Christmas, but Christmas is the next day, and even after months of saving, she only has $1.87. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl or cry. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home, a furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had the word on the lookout for the medicine-y squad. So, as she's crying, that we're taking a look at her apartment, all right, her flat. And it's not anything to really look at, all right. As a matter of fact, it might almost look like beggars live there, they said, or, people that are struggling. But you're going to see that living in this kind of an apartment or flat does not bother Della. All right. When we read the necklace, you will see that this certainly would have bothered Madame Loisel. But this does not bother Della at all. Okay. She's just happy to have a place to stay. In the vestibule below belonged to this flat a letter box into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 a week. Now, when the income has shrunk to $20, the letters of Dillingham look blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. So what they're talking about here is, they're in an apartment building, and in the little entryway, when you first come into the building, there's all the mailboxes. And if you were making a decent amount of money back then, you could have your full name on your mailbox. So at one point, her husband Jim, okay, James Dillingham Young, was making $30 a week, which was a pretty good amount back then. So they were able to have their full name on the mailbox. But for whatever reason, he got a pay decrease. Usually you get a pay increase. But for whatever reason, he got a decrease, and now he's only making $20 a week. So they're not able to keep up the look of their mailbox. So now it just almost looks like just the letter D on their mailbox. But again, that does not matter to Della. All right. When her husband Jim comes home, she's so happy to see him, and they have a wonderful, loving relationship, which you're going to see. Della finished her cry and attended her cheeks with a powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. All right. Now, probably not everything is really gray, but when you think about what mood, Della's in, she's sad, she's depressed. Tomorrow's Christmas. She doesn't have a lot of money. She wants to buy her husband a present. Everything looks sad and gray to her. A gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had been spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near of being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. So you might say to yourself, why does the author keep saying $1.87? $1.87 was all she had. Well, think about it. When something's on your mind and it's bothering you, no matter how hard you try not to think about it, it keeps popping back up. And you're going to see here that, she doesn't want to just, buy something cheap for her husband, okay, even though she only has $1.87. It says here she wants to buy something that's fine and rare and something that's special. All right. We can see how much she loves him here, that, something just off the shelf is probably not good enough, okay? And it's got to be worthy of being owned by her husband. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, attain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. So if you were to look in an older classroom, You might see like little pieces of wood between the old windows, very small, maybe about 5, 6 inches wide. And in Della's apartment, between her windows, it's the same thing, just a little piece of wood. But on that wood in her apartment are little mirrors. So if she were to like walk down the hall or pass all those little mirrors, because she's skinny and thin, all right, she's able to get a fairly good picture of herself, even though it's not one big mirror that's put all together. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there are two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry and mocked at Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed just to see him pluck his beard from envy. So there were two important things, or the two prized possessions of Jim and Della. And Jim was his pocket watch, his gold pocket watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. So his pocket watch is something that just, it's not a pocket, a wrist watch, but it's something, it's the watch that goes into his pocket on a chain. And the other was Della's long, beautiful hair. And here in this paragraph, we see the other two allusions, or the reference to something famous. And in here, it's the Bible. So the author makes an allusion to the Queen of Sheba, who is from the Bible. She is a queen that had lots of money, lots of wealth, but yet if she saw Della's hair, she would be jealous or envious of Della's long, beautiful hair. All right. And then the other one is King Solomon, and he's also from the Bible. So if King Solomon, who was a king from the Bible that once again was known for his wealth, his money, his knowledge, all right, if he saw um, Jim's pocket watch, he would be jealous and envious, and even he would want it. So the Queen of Sheba, King Solomon from the Bible, those are allusions, okay? So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. So, okay, her beautiful hair, she's crying a little bit. What is she going to do? On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Safrani, hair goods of all kinds. One flight, Della ran up and collected herself, panting before Madame, who was large, too white, chilly, and hardly looking the Safrani. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. "I buy hair," said Madame. "Take your hat off and let's have a sight of the looks of it." Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. So Della decides to cut her hair and sell it. And she's going to get $20 for it, which back then was a pretty decent amount of money. So when I say she cut her hair, I mean Della's hair, it says, went past her knees, and she's going to get it cut super, super short, like very close to her head. So she's going to lose all of it, okay? But she's willing to give up her prized possession of her hair in order to have money to buy her husband a nice present. And she says to Madame Safrani, just give it to me quick, like hurry up and do it, okay? She knows she wants to do it and she doesn't want to second guess herself. So the quicker she can get her hair cut, it can be over and done with, and she can go on to look for, a nice present for her husband. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was none other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone, and not by meticulous ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. So she finally found the perfect gift for Jim, and it's a chain for his pocket watch. All right. And you can see here that, she talks about how perfect this chain is for Jim. It's just like him. It's beautiful, it's quiet, and it's got some value. Okay. It's, a little bit expensive. And she says that this is just like Jim because Jim is beautiful and he's not all like in your face. So, when you look at this, you don't think like bling bling, okay? You think of just beautiful, simple value. All right, perfect for Jim. And even though Jim loves his pocket watch, he sometimes doesn't look at it as much as he should because it just has an old leather strap. But if he has this beautiful, simple, um, silver chain, okay, then, this would be perfect for him, okay? Or I'm sorry, a platinum chain, not a silver chain. So she has 87 cents left. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work, repairing the ravages made by the generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. So remember, her hair now is super short, very close to her head. So she's hoping that if she curls her hair, it'll make her look a little bit more girlish and still beautiful for her husband. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the pork chops. Jim was never late. Della dabbled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stairway down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things. And now she whispered, Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty. So again, she's not being selfish here. She's not thinking of herself. She's worried that her husband will still think that she is pretty, after cutting her hair. The door opened, and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22, and to be burdened with a family. Now, it's just him and Della right now, but he still is the man responsible for, working and bringing home the money. He needed a new overcoat and was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. Jim, darling, she cried, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. So, he just opens the door, closes it, comes in, and just like stares at her. And she can't read his expression. She's like, he doesn't look angry, he doesn't look upset, but he's just staring at her. So she continues. She said, "My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at this patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said, with an air of almost idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold." Oops, sorry about that. "It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone, too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you." "Oh, maybe the hairs on my head were numbered," she went on with a sudden serious sweetness. "But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the pork chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed to quickly awake. He enfolded or hugged his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year? What's the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. So, according to Della and Jim, who cares how much money Jim makes? $8 a week, $20 a week, $30 a week, or $1 million a year. They have something that's worth more than that, that's more valuable than that. And that's each other. And that's the love that they have for one another. So that's more important than money. And remember, that's the complete opposite of Madame Wissel from the necklace, what she would say. Okay. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said about me. "I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me look like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." Jim's like, "Oh, please." He says, "I love you. I don't care what you do with your hair. But if you open up my present for you, you may see why I was so shocked." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper. And then an ecstatic scream of joy. And then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs side and back that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornment were gone. So she opens up her present, and she sees these hair combs. Now, it's not like a comb that she's going to brush her hair with. These are decorative combs that would hold her long hair in place. And she knew that these were expensive. Okay, they were made from tortoise shell, they had jewels on them. All right, and this is how great of a husband Jim is. Okay, she never asked for these set of combs. She probably never even talked about them because but he saw her looking at them in a store window. But she knew that they were so expensive, she never even thought that she would ever own them. All right? But now she has them, but ironically, she can't wear them because she cut her hair and sold it to buy Jim his present. So we're going to see how this plays out, okay? But she hugged them to her bosom and at length was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep 'em a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now suppose let's put the pork chops on." Oh no! So we now find out that Jim sold his prized possession of the pocket watch in order to buy Della those beautiful combs for her hair. So now at this point, we have realized, or they've realized, that they both sold their prized possessions, Della her hair, Jim his pocket watch, in order to buy each other something for Christmas. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas gifts. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in a case of duplication. And here I have lamely relented to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and received gifts, such as they are the wisest. Everywhere they are the wisest. They are the Magi. So in this last paragraph, the author O. Henry says that Jim and Della were both wise and unwise. He says they are unwise because they gave up their prized possessions. Okay? They gave up something that was super duper important to them. However, they were wise because they were willing to give up their prized possessions for someone else, for each other, to make someone else happy. Okay? They were willing to not think about themselves and to think about others. All right? And that makes them both wise and unwise. Okay? And it says that Jim and Della gave the best gifts to each other. Okay? And those were the gifts from the heart. Okay? It wasn't something that they just ran to the store and just threw something in the cart. It was something that they gave thought to and something that they were willing to give up their most prized possession for. So this is what we call explicit theme. Okay? It is explicit theme. Okay? The lesson or what the author wants you to take away from it, the moral, the lesson. It is explicit theme because it is explained to you. The author comes right out and tells you, okay? He says that the best gifts come from the heart, okay? That Jim and Della were willing to give up their most prized possessions for each other, okay? And that's what you should take away from this. Giving to others. The best gifts come from the heart. They don't have to be the most expensive gifts, but they have to be ones that people thought about and came from their heart. That's the best gift. And because the author tells us, it's what we call explicit theme. Again, this is the opposite of the necklace because that was implicit. We read it, we had to imply and figure out what it could be, and everybody could have a different answer. But the gift of the Magi, this story here, is explicit theme. The author tells us that the best gifts come from the heart. The only thing that stinks, at this point, is that they gave up their prized possessions and they got gifts for those prized possessions. That's what makes this story ironic. All right. This is what we call situational irony. This stinks. okay, or it's a sucky situation. They gave up their most prized possessions, then got items or gifts for their prized possessions, which now they can't use. I mean, eventually one day Della should be able to wear these combs in her hair should grow back. But at this point, we don't know if they're ever going to be able to afford to get back, um, you know, Jim's pocket watch. But again, it doesn't matter to Jim and Della. They have the best thing they could possibly have, and that's love for each other and the best relationship that they could possibly ask for. All right. And they were willing to give up their prized possessions for each other. Is that something that you would be willing to do for someone?